See, when a man has no one but God, he walks into a realm where earthly attachments lose their grip and eternity becomes real. This is not just loneliness, this is sacred ground. It is the place where the soul discovers its true dependence, not on the approval of others, not on material stability, not on fleeting comforts, but on the presence of the living God. Some of the greatest men who ever walked this earth were men who spent time in the wilderness of isolation. Abraham walked away from everything familiar to follow a voice he could not see. Joseph was betrayed, sold, imprisoned, and forgotten before the dream came to pass. Elijah stood alone against kings and prophets of false gods. They all walked through the fire of solitude, but not a single one walked alone. And neither will you. You are not abandoned. You are being refined. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared. God is doing a work in you that no man can see yet. That's why you must not give up. Don't curse the silence. Don't run from the stillness. Stay with it. Something holy is happening. When the world leaves you behind, when friends fall away, when loved ones don't understand, when you stand at the edge of yourself and say, God, I can't take one more step, that's when heaven answers with power. That's when strength rises that's not your own. That's when peace comes in the middle of a storm, not because the waves stop, but because you finally saw the one who walks on water. Faith is forged not in comfort, but in contradiction. When everything says you're alone, yet you choose to believe you're held. When everything says you're finished, yet you hear the still small voice say, I'm not done with you yet. That's faith. That's fire tested belief, and that is unshakable. God has always been in the business of showing up when all other options are gone. He doesn't need favorable conditions. He doesn't require a crowd. He doesn't wait for perfect timing by human standards. He steps into the prison cell, into the lion's den, into the fiery furnace, not after the crisis, but right in the middle of it. And he does it again and again for those who call on his name. You may be feeling overlooked today. Maybe no one sees your pain. Maybe they see your strength, but not your struggle. They see the smile, but not the sleepless nights. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to believe the lie that you have to carry this all on your own. But I came to tell you, you don't. You were never meant to. There's one who sticks closer than a brother, one who will never leave you nor forsake you, one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, one whose eyes are on the sparrow and whose arms are underneath you even now. He sees the hidden battles. He sees the broken places. He sees the tears that no one else sees. And he says, you are mine. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. There's a kind of prayer that comes only when a man is out of options. It's not polished, it's not pretty, it's raw, it's real, it's desperate. It's the cry that rises from the dust and the ashes and says, God, if you don't show up, I won't make it. And that kind of prayer moves heaven. When you reach the end of yourself, you reach the beginning of grace. And grace is not some fragile concept. Grace is a force. It lifts you up when your knees give out. It carries you when your strength is gone. It wraps you in mercy when you've failed again. Grace is the hand of God pulling you out of the pit, not because you earned it, but because He loves you. I don't know what valley you're walking through. I don't know what the silence feels like in your life, but I do know this. If you've got God, you've got everything you need. When the world fades, when people walk away, when doors close, God remains. And not only does He remain, He restores. God doesn't just sit with you in your brokenness, He rebuilds you. He doesn't just comfort you in your sorrow. He gives you beauty for ashes. He gives you strength for your weakness. He turns mourning into dancing. He turns weeping into joy. There is a future for you. There is hope beyond the pain. There is life after the loss. But you won't find it chasing the approval of people or the pleasures of this world. You'll find it on your knees alone with the one who shaped you in the womb and knows the number of hairs on your head. Don't despise this season. Don't rush the process. Lean into it. Let it purify you. Let it simplify you. Let it draw you closer to the only one who can satisfy the deep places of your heart. This world is full of noise, opinions, distractions, lies. But when you're alone with God, that noise fades. And what's left is truth. What's left is love. What's left is power. That power will fill you. That love will change you. That truth will set you free. There will be a day when you look back on this season not with bitterness, but with gratitude. You'll say, it was in that lonely place that I learned to listen. It was in that dark valley that I found the light. It was when I had no one else that I realized God was all I ever needed. And when you rise from this place, you'll carry something unshakable. You'll have a testimony forged in fire. You'll speak with authority, not because you read it in a book, but because you lived it in your bones. You'll carry peace into chaotic rooms. You'll bring hope to broken people. And when they ask, how did you survive? You'll say, I had no one but God. And that was enough. You are not disqualified. You are not too far gone. You are not beyond repair. In fact, you are exactly where you need to be for a miracle to unfold. When a man has no one but God, he is ready to be used by God. He is no longer leaning on shallow support systems. He is no longer intoxicated with applause. He is no longer chasing what can never satisfy. He is standing on the rock. And that kind of man cannot be shaken. This is not the end of your story. This is the chapter that changes everything. Stay faithful, stay humble, stay available. God is not done. He is writing something beautiful, even if right now all you see are broken lines. Trust the author. He finishes what he starts. When a man finds himself in the depths of solitude, it is easy for him to feel as though he has been abandoned by the world. The silence of an empty room, the absence of voices, and the lack of human presence can be overwhelming. In those moments, loneliness can feel like a curse, a painful reminder of what has been lost or of the relationships that have faded away. But what if this very solitude is not a curse at all? What if it's the sacred space where God works most powerfully in a man's life? The truth is, solitude is often where transformation takes place, where a man can hear the voice of God most clearly and where his soul can be shaped for something greater. It is in the quiet, in the moments of being alone, that a man can strip away the distractions of the world. The hustle and bustle of life often drown out the still, small voice of God. In the noise of daily living, we are bombarded with opinions, expectations, and endless demands. But when a man is alone, without the pressure of pleasing others or responding to the constant stream of noise, it becomes easier to listen, to reflect, and to be still in the presence of God. In solitude, a man is invited into a deeper relationship with his Creator. There is no one else to impress, no one else to answer to, just the unfiltered connection between the soul and the Almighty. This is the space where God can begin his work of personal transformation. The distractions that once clouded his mind fall away, and he begins to see clearly. Solitude allows a man to confront the deepest parts of his heart, the parts that are often hidden from the world and even from himself. It's in the silence that we can see our weaknesses, our fears, our doubts, and our insecurities. But this is not a cause for despair. It is an opportunity for growth. For it is in these moments that God can meet us where we are, not in spite of our weaknesses, but because of them. God doesn't call the perfect, he calls the broken, the weary, the ones who have nowhere else to turn. And in the quiet, he begins to mold us into who we were always meant to be. Moreover, solitude isn't just a place of self reflection, it is also a place of revelation. It is in the stillness that we can hear God's voice more clearly than ever. His words can cut through the noise of our lives and pierce our hearts with truth, wisdom, and guidance. When the distractions are gone, God's voice becomes the loudest thing in our lives. It is in solitude that we can truly surrender our plans, our ambitions, and our desires to Him. We stop trying to control every aspect of our lives and instead open ourselves to His leading. In that moment of surrender, the transformation begins. In solitude, we are not abandoned. We are being prepared. God uses this time to refine us, to teach us, and to strengthen us for the journey ahead. While it may feel uncomfortable, even painful, it is in these times of isolation that we become who we were always meant to be. God works through our solitude to draw us closer to Himself and to help us become more like Him. Solitude is not a place of emptiness. It is a place where the fullness of God's presence can fill us, renew us, and transform us from the inside out. Throughout history, many of the greatest individuals were not thrust into greatness by fame, fortune, or applause, but by seasons of solitude and challenge. It is in the wilderness, far from the spotlight, that God often does His most profound work in a person's life. When Moses fled to the wilderness, when David was tending sheep, when Jesus withdrew to the desert, they were not being abandoned, they were being prepared. The wilderness is not the end of the story. It is often the very place where God begins to shape us for the work ahead. The wilderness, by its nature, is a place of isolation and hardship. It's a place where the comforts of the world are stripped away, leaving a person with only what truly matters. In the wilderness, there are no distractions, no applause, and no external validation. It's just a person and their creator. And it is in this quiet, challenging environment that God works in ways we cannot always understand in the moment. There is a profound transformation that happens in the wilderness, one that prepares a person not just for success, but for a life of purpose. Think of Moses. Before he could lead a nation, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, an exile, a fugitive running from his past mistakes. But in the wilderness, he learned humility, patience, and dependence on God. He experienced the voice of God in a burning bush, and it was in that moment that he realized his life was part of something much bigger than himself. Had he been in Egypt, surrounded by power and influence, he might have never learned the lessons that the wilderness taught him. The wilderness wasn't a punishment for Moses, it was the place where God prepared him for a divine purpose that would change the course of history. David, too, was anointed to be king, but he didn't immediately sit on a throne. Instead, he spent years running from King Saul, hiding in caves, and living on the run. It was in these wilderness years that David grew in strength, character, and trust in God. He learned to lead people not through military might, but through humility and reliance on the Lord. He wrote many of the Psalms during this time, expressions of raw emotion, faith, and intimacy with God. Had he ascended to the throne without these formative years, he might not have been prepared to lead with the wisdom and grace that marked his reign. The wilderness is not just a physical place, it is often a spiritual condition that many of us experience in our lives. There are times when we find ourselves in seasons of difficulty, loss, or transition. During these seasons, it can feel as though we are far from God's presence, far from His purpose for our lives. But the truth is, these wilderness seasons are often the very places where God is preparing us for something greater. They are not dead ends, they are launching pads for what lies ahead. Just as God called Moses and David out of the wilderness at the appointed time, He will also bring us out of our wilderness seasons when the time is right. But the preparation that happens in the wilderness is not to be underestimated. It is in the wilderness that we learn to rely solely on God. where we are tested and refined and where we discover strength we never knew we had. The wilderness season may be difficult, but it is in these moments of testing and isolation that we are formed into the people God needs us to be in order to accomplish His purposes. It is in the wilderness that we learn to trust. We learn that God is faithful even when we can't see the way forward. We learn that His provision is enough even when our resources seem limited. We learn to hear His voice clearly in the quietness of the desert, away from the noise of the world. And it is here that we discover a deeper intimacy with God, a relationship that is built on trust and reliance rather than on the applause of the crowd or the approval of others. The wilderness is not a place to run from, it is a place to embrace. It is where God shapes us, refines us, and prepares us for what lies ahead. So, when you find yourself in a season of solitude, struggle, or confusion, remember this: you are not forgotten, you are being prepared. The wilderness may be uncomfortable, but it is not the end. It is the place where God is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. In the depths of despair, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear and the strength to keep going seems to slip away, it is in these moments of weakness that God's strength is most profoundly revealed. For many, weakness is something to be avoided or hidden, a sign of failure or inadequacy. But in the eyes of God, it is not a weakness to be ashamed of. It is the very place where His strength can be most fully displayed. It is in the moments when a man feels he cannot go on, when he is stripped of his own ability and power, that he encounters a strength beyond himself. In these seasons, we are brought face to face with our limitations, with the harsh reality that there are situations in life we cannot control, people we cannot change, and outcomes we cannot determine. It is in these moments of helplessness that God's strength becomes the most evident. His power working through our weakness is the most beautiful and transformative force in the world. Paul, one of the greatest apostles of the early church, spoke of this profound truth when he described his own struggles and hardships. He prayed 3 times for God to remove a thorn in the flesh that tormented him. But God's answer was not to take away the pain, but to declare, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. Paul's response to this divine revelation was profound. "Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul recognized that it was not in his strength that God's glory was most fully revealed, but in his weakness. In that place of vulnerability, Paul was able to experience the sufficiency of God's grace and the depth of His power. This concept seems counterintuitive to the world's understanding of strength. In society, we are taught to rely on our own abilities, to push through adversity with sheer willpower, to overcome challenges through personal strength and determination. But God calls us to a different way of thinking. He invites us to surrender our reliance on self and to trust in His power. He shows us that true strength is not about what we can do in our own strength, but about what He can do through us when we are willing to admit our need for Him. When we are at our lowest, when we feel completely powerless, we are often more open to God's work in our lives. It is then that we stop relying on our own ingenuity, wisdom, or resources and begin to lean fully on Him. In our weakness, we make space for God's power to shine. His strength does not come to us in the way we expect. It is not a human kind of strength defined by physical might or self sufficiency. It is a divine strength, a power that is gentle yet unshakable, a power that gives us the courage to stand when we want to fall, the wisdom to know what to do when we are confused, and the peace to endure when we feel overwhelmed. God's strength does not negate our weakness, it is made perfect through it. It is as though God takes our frailty and through His grace turns it into something beautiful, something powerful. In moments of despair, when we are broken and weary, God meets us with the power to rise again. His strength sustains us when we cannot sustain ourselves. His strength carries us when our legs give out. His strength lifts us when we are too tired to keep going. The beauty of this divine strength is that it transforms us. We come out of the trials, the times of weakness, stronger than before, not because we did it in our own power, but because we allowed God to work through us. When we acknowledge our dependence on Him, we open ourselves up to His transformative power. We emerge from weakness not as the same person, but as someone who has been shaped, refined, and empowered by God Himself. The truth is, God's strength is not given to us in the absence of weakness, but in the midst of it. It is when we are weak that we are most able to experience His strength in its purest form. When we feel like we have nothing left, that is when He can fill us with everything we need. In that moment of divine exchange, we realize that the very thing we thought would defeat us, the trial, the struggle, the weakness, has become the place where we encounter the fullness of God's power and grace. So if you find yourself in a season of weakness, do not despair. Do not believe the lie that you are not enough or that you are failing. In fact, it is precisely in this place that God is about to do His greatest work. His strength is made perfect in your weakness. And if you will trust Him in this season, you will come through stronger, more dependent on Him, and more aware of the power that only He can provide. There are moments in life when we cry out to God and feel as though our prayers fall on deaf ears. In these times of silence, it can be difficult to see beyond the stillness and feel the presence of God. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that God has abandoned us or that He is somehow distant, uninvolved, or uninterested in our struggles. But the truth is that God's silence is not a sign of His absence. In fact, it is often in these moments of quiet that God is working more powerfully than we can comprehend. We live in a world that values instant answers and quick solutions. We are accustomed to immediate results, whether in our work, relationships, or even our technology. But God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is not bound by the pressures of the world around us. Sometimes the silence that we experience from God is not a withdrawal, but a moment of divine waiting, a space where God is allowing us to grow, to trust, and to prepare for what He is about to do. Throughout Scripture, we see many examples of God's silence during key moments of His people's journeys. The Israelites waited in Egypt for hundreds of years, crying out for deliverance, but God did not immediately respond. There were moments in the wilderness when they wondered if God had forgotten them as they faced hunger, thirst, and overwhelming fear. Yet God was with them all along, orchestrating their deliverance in His own time. His silence was not a sign of abandonment, but a sign of preparation as He was shaping them for the promised land. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced the silence of His Father. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as He prayed in anguish, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In His moment of deepest agony, it seemed as though God had turned His face away. Yet in that silence, God was not absent. He was fulfilling His ultimate plan of redemption through Jesus' suffering. God's silence on the cross did not signify abandonment, but rather the unfolding of His perfect will for salvation. God's silence is a powerful reminder that we are not in control. In our human nature, we often demand immediate answers, quick fixes, and a clear path ahead. But God's silence teaches us patience, faith, and trust in His timing. It is in the waiting, in the moments when we feel as though nothing is happening, that God is often doing His most significant work. He is preparing us, strengthening us, and aligning our hearts with His will. In the silence, God is cultivating deeper faith and greater reliance on His plan, which is always far greater than anything we could have orchestrated ourselves. The silence is also a test of our trust. When God is silent, we are faced with a choice. Will we continue to believe in His goodness even when we don't hear His voice? Will we remain faithful when it feels like He is distant? This is a critical moment in our spiritual journey. God's silence invites us to trust not in what we can see or hear, but in what we know about His character. We know that He is good, that He is faithful, and that He loves us. And even when we cannot sense His presence, we can rest assured that He is still with us, working behind the scenes to bring about His perfect plan. The delays and periods of silence in our lives are not signs of rejection or abandonment. They are part of the divine process shaping us for the plans God has for us. While we may not understand the silence in the moment, we can trust that God's timing is always perfect. When He finally does speak, it will be at just the right moment, and His plan will unfold in ways we could never have imagined. So, when you find yourself in a season of silence, don't be discouraged. Know that God is not absent. He is present, working in ways that are unseen, preparing you for the next step in your journey. His silence is not a sign of neglect, but a sign of His perfect timing and care. Trust in His process, wait in faith, knowing that His plan will always be worth the wait. There comes a moment in every person's life when we reach the end of ourselves. We find ourselves standing on the edge, exhausted, worn out, and feeling like we have nothing left to give. The struggles, the disappointments, the heartaches, and the failures all pile up, and we can no longer carry the weight on our own. In these moments, we may feel as though we are lost, as though we have reached the limit of our strength and endurance. But it is precisely in these moments of complete surrender, when we come to the end of our own ability, that we encounter God's grace. God's grace is not a fragile thing. It is not a mere consolation or a passing comfort. His grace is powerful, unshakable, and unfathomably deep. It is in our moments of weakness, when we feel the most broken and vulnerable, that His grace comes to lift us up. God's grace doesn't just soothe us in our pain, it strengthens us. It gives us the power to rise again when we are too tired to stand, to move forward when we are certain we cannot take another step, and to continue when we feel as though we have reached our limits. The Apostle Paul, one of the most prominent figures in early Christianity, understood the sufficiency of God's grace better than most. Paul faced numerous trials, persecutions, and hardships throughout his life. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, he writes about a personal struggle he faced, referring to a thorn in the flesh that tormented him. He prayed earnestly, asking God 3 times to remove this burden from his life. Yet instead of delivering him from the pain, God answered with these powerful words: "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul's response to this revelation was profound. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. What Paul realized in that moment was that God's grace was not only enough to sustain him through his trials, but it was also the very thing that empowered him to keep going. It was in his weakness that God's strength shone through most brightly. His grace became the source of Paul's strength and endurance, even in the midst of his greatest struggles. This is the nature of God's grace. It is not a temporary fix or fleeting comfort, but a deep and unshakable foundation. When we feel like we've given all that we can, when we feel like we're about to collapse under the weight of life's burdens, God's grace steps in and holds us up. It becomes the support we lean on when our own strength fails. It is in our most vulnerable moments that God's grace reaches out to us, reminding us that we do not have to carry the weight of the world on our own. God's grace is not earned or deserved, it is freely given. There is nothing we can do to make ourselves worthy of it, and yet, in our most desperate moments, it is offered to us abundantly. It is in this grace that we find the strength to keep moving forward, to continue in the face of adversity, and to endure when the road ahead seems impossible. God's grace is sufficient to meet us exactly where we are and to lift us to where He wants us to be. It is in our weakness that we come to truly understand the depth of God's grace. When we are at the end of ourselves, we finally realize that we cannot do it on our own. We cannot control everything, we cannot fix everything, and we cannot carry every burden. But it is in that very surrender, in admitting that we are not enough, that God's grace flows in and empowers us. We are not meant to rely on our own strength, but on the strength that God provides. And when we rely on His grace, we discover that it is more than enough to carry us through. God's grace doesn't just carry us, it transforms us. It's not only a source of strength, but also a source of healing. It mends the broken places in our hearts, restores what has been lost, and renews our spirits. It is in grace that we find the courage to forgive, the resilience to hope again, and a peace that transcends understanding. There may be moments when we feel utterly depleted, when we feel as though we have nothing left to give, but even in those moments, God's grace is not exhausted, it is infinite. It is sufficient for every trial, every challenge, and every heartache. When we come to the end of ourselves, it is only then that we are able to fully experience the power and sufficiency of God's grace. And in that grace, we find the strength to stand again, to press forward, and to continue walking in His purpose for our lives. So when you feel that you are at your weakest, when you feel like you can't go on any longer, remember this: God's grace is enough. It is powerful, it is sustaining, and it will never run dry. You are never alone, and His grace will always be sufficient to carry you through. In the darkest moments of life, when isolation and struggle weigh heavily on our hearts, it is easy to feel as though we are lost or forgotten. The road ahead may seem unclear, and the burdens we carry can feel impossible to bear. But in these very moments of uncertainty, it is faith and hope that become our anchors, keeping us grounded and moving forward even when everything around us seems to crumble. Faith and hope in God are not just fleeting emotions, they are the lifelines that sustain us even in the most difficult seasons of our lives. They remind us that God's plan is always at work, even when we cannot see it, and that He is preparing us for something greater. Faith is the foundation upon which we build our trust in God. It is the belief that even when circumstances appear bleak, God is still good and His promises are true. Faith does not require us to have all the answers or to see the whole picture. In fact, it often requires us to step forward in trust when we have no idea what lies ahead. Faith is the decision to hold on to God's character even in the absence of clear direction. It is the confidence that though the storms rage around us, God is still in control and His purpose for our lives remains unchanged. Hope is the fruit of that faith. Hope is what keeps us going when all we have is a glimpse of God's promises, a faint whisper of the good He has in store for us. It is the assurance that no matter how hard the journey may be, we are not alone. Hope gives us the strength to endure, to press forward, and to hold on to the belief that our present circumstances do not define our future. Hope tells us that there is more waiting for us, that God's ultimate plan for our lives is greater than any moment of suffering or trial. The Bible reminds us of the power of faith and hope in Romans 8:24-25. For in this hope we were saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. This passage beautifully captures the essence of what it means to have faith and hope in God. We do not always see the full picture, but we trust in His promise that He is working behind the scenes. It is this hope that helps us navigate the difficult seasons of our lives, knowing that God has a plan even if we don't yet understand it. When we place our faith in God and hold on to hope, we are not only sustained through the hard times, we are also being prepared for the greater purpose He has for our lives. Struggles and challenges are not random. They are the refining process that shapes us into the people God needs us to be for the next chapter of our journey. The trials we face serve a purpose, even when we can't immediately see it. They prepare us to rise again, stronger and more equipped to fulfill the purpose that God has set before us. Take, for instance, the story of Joseph. His life was marked by betrayal, abandonment, and hardship. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, unjustly thrown into prison, and left alone in dark moments, Joseph had every reason to lose hope. Yet through it all, Joseph never lost faith in God. He trusted that God had a plan for his life, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. In the end, Joseph rose to a position of great power where he was able to save countless lives during a time of famine. His faith and hope in God, even in the midst of suffering, not only sustained him, but prepared him to fulfill his divine purpose. Similarly, the Apostle Paul, who faced persecution, imprisonment, and relentless hardship, continued to press on in faith, always hopeful in the promises of God. Despite the pain, he knew that the trials he endured were not in vain. In Romans 5:03-04, Paul writes, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope." This is a powerful reminder that every trial we face is an opportunity for growth. Our faith and hope are refined through adversity, making us more resilient, more compassionate, and more capable of fulfilling the purpose God has for us. When we hold on to faith and hope, we are being equipped for the future. The trials we endure today may seem like setbacks, but in reality, they are the very experiences that prepare us for the greater purpose God has set before us. Our struggles do not define us, but they shape us. They teach us perseverance, humility, and trust. They refine our character and increase our capacity to love and serve others. Through it all, we can rest in the knowledge that God is using every moment of our lives, every hardship, every trial, and every joy to prepare us for the unique purpose He has for us. Faith and hope are the tools that help us navigate the journey, even when the path is unclear. They remind us that God is with us, that He is working all things together for our good, and that His timing is perfect. We may not always understand the reasons for our struggles, but we can trust that God is leading us towards something greater. So, in those moments when you feel isolated, when the weight of the world seems too much to bear, hold on to faith and hope. Trust that God is at work behind the scenes, even when you can't see it. Keep moving forward, knowing that He is preparing you for a greater purpose, a purpose that will be revealed in His perfect timing. And when the time comes for you to rise again, you will find that you are stronger, wiser, and more equipped to fulfill the calling God has placed on your life.